Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel here at Nomad Audio Vlogs. My name is Davian Knight, your host here. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe to my channel and check out the rest of my content. This video here is about, is your commercial studio a scalable business or a job that you just got for yourself? When I first got my commercial studio, I didn't realize that I was just buying myself a job. Many of y'all, it's no different than when you have a landscaping business, pest control, HVAC, roofing, cleaning services, carpet cleaning. These are businesses, but really they're jobs that you just got for yourself. Because if you stop that activity, then there's no more income coming in, which is almost very similar to any regular job. So when I first started, if you go and watch my other videos on my experience running a commercial studio, I was in the red for almost 6 months before I started making profit. And towards the end of the year, I had found other producers and engineers who had clients of their own who wanted to record their clients at my space. I only needed the studio on the weekends, on Saturday and Sunday, and it was open the rest of the week. And so the property manager there, who had his office across from mine, who does tax returns during tax season and healthcare insurance, well, those are businesses that can't be scaled. He has to do those activities. And he had seen me struggle, and then he had also seen when things turned around. But I guess he didn't like the fact that people were showing up with access to my office and my studio. If you hear like a white noise in the background, it's my AC, guys. So please forgive me on that. I'm not using a condenser mic, and it would have just made the AC higher. So it's actually better this way, so you can still hear me talk. Anyways, so I was getting $80 a week. They were offering me $80 a week for using my studio, and with that right there, I was going to be able to cover the studio rent and whatever I made during the weekends, engineering remotely for churches and houses of worship. That was going to be pure profit in my pocket, and I no longer had to worry about paying for the rent out of pocket for the month. It was coming from the sublease. Well, the property manager didn't like that. And I understood that he was maybe not comfortable with other people accessing the building, but it was people that I knew, that I had trusted, that I had documentation that were going to pay me per week to use the studio when I wasn't there. So now I was making money without having to be there, just on the weekends. And he didn't like that. He didn't like the fact that he knew that now I was going to be able to cover the rent without it coming out of my pocket directly. And he knew that I now had turned it into a scalable business, an enterprise that didn't require me to be physically present. And I had cameras in the office, in the studio, so I was able to see everything 24/7 without having to be physically present there. So I was allowed to turn that into a job that I had bought for myself originally into a business that was scalable, that was going to pay for itself and didn't require me to be physically present. So when I wanted to switch out the lease from, because I started off as a sole proprietor under my name, when I wanted to switch it over to an LLC, he said that he would have to terminate my contract, terminate my lease, make a new one, and because it was now under an LLC, the rent was going to be double the price, which was basically him saying, I don't like that you're doing this. I don't like the fact that you now have a business that can pay for itself when I can't even do that, and I'm the property manager. So I don't want this to happen. So I am going to discourage you by doubling your rent if this is what you're going to do. Because he knew that by doubling my rent, then the $80 wasn't going to suffice anymore to cover that monthly rent. So I kept it sole proprietorship under my name. I kept it the same, but I realized that at some point I was going to have to close down the studio as well. Apart from the fact that I was going to relocate, I had to close it anyway, because I realized that there was a feeling of envy and a little bit of jealousy there, because he had seen me struggle when I first started leasing the place with him, because it was just me by myself in the beginning. But once I was able to turn it around, once I started working remotely, and once I started subleasing out the studio to other professionals, to use the space when I'm not using it, and to use that to pay the rent out of itself. It's now paying for itself. So now it went from being a job that I had originally bought myself to a business that didn't require me to be present, with the cameras being there. I could see everything that was going on from my phone, so I didn't have to physically be there, and it was now paying. It was paying for itself, and so I would just come in Saturday and Sunday to do my engineering, and get my pay, and that was all for my profit. That was all in, and so him having to be there, him not having a scalable business, basically a job. That This is why I say that sometimes self-employment does not mean you have a scalable business. I didn't have one when I first started. It almost accidentally turned into a scalable business because I never planned for it. It just happened. I just happened to find the right people that needed my space and were willing to pay me for it, and it was enough to cover basically like 95% of the rent out of pocket. So the rest was on me, and it was basically nothing but profit at that point. And I didn't have to physically be there. Besides the weekends. And so that was working for me, and he didn't like that. And I guess he wasn't comfortable with people accessing the building and accessing my office and stuff like that. So I understand that. But I showed him that there were people that he didn't have to worry about. Showed him the documentation I had. Wasn't enough to convince him. So that's when I knew that it wasn't about business anymore. It was just a matter of resentment and jealousy, or envy, you could say, because I now had a business, a real working business that was going to work with or without me being there. And he didn't like that because he didn't even have that for himself. And he was the property manager of that commercial building. So instead of him telling me or asking me how did I do that and if I could help him do that, I would have more than gladly helped. But he wasn't looking for that. He just didn't like the fact that I had found something that was finally starting to work for me. Now, other tenants in that building weren't even paying the rent on time. Some of them were behind. Some of them were trying to skip out on him without paying. And I never did that. I always paid my rent on time. I always made sure that things were good, things were straight. And when he realized, though, that I was now subleasing the building and that they were paying me to use the building and I was using that to pay the rent to him, he just didn't like that. When he realized that I wasn't there anymore, mostly Monday through Friday, except for the weekends, he didn't like that at all. He would call me constantly throughout the night because he just didn't like other people in the building that he had leased to me. So when I wanted to lease it over to the LLC instead of having it under my name, he didn't like that, and he wanted to double my rent to do that, terminate my contract, make a new one with the rent doubled. And that's when I knew that it was just not going to work, because I didn't understand why he would double my rent if it was just going to go to an LLC. It's so that's the thing. So a lot of the times you got to ask yourself, is your studio or the gig that you got for yourself, is it a job that you bought for yourself, or is it a business that you can scale without your presence? Because in the beginning, when I started, it was just a job I had bought for myself, and I realized that if I stopped the activity, the income would stop. When I turned it into a sublease, it turned into a scalable business that started to pay for itself. I now had a business, not a job, and a job a business that was now going to provide for me an owner's benefit of me not having to be present in order for it to work and generate income. So, that's what I'm saying. So if you're a studio owner, or you're about to get when you're an engineer producer, understand, if you're going to get into a commercial space, ask yourself, can I turn this into a scalable business, or am I just buying myself a job? So with that being said, thank you so much. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe and check out the rest of my content if you find this interesting, and I hope it helps. Until next time.